Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Nurses of Reddit. What was the most haunting thing someone said to you on their deathbed? Not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You know what's funny? Everyone says living is the hard part. No, dying is much, much harder than living. Cancer patient in their 40s, who was incredibly active and athletic up until their diagnosis, said this to me as a student in my hospice clinical. Stuck with me ever since. How will I explain this mess? Pointing to his butt. Second hand from a close ER nurse. Lad comes in after a car accident. His work van had flipped and rolled. The fella was wheeled in fully conscious, no pain after EMS or disorientation. However, he was completely twisted in half from the midsection down. There was no way he would survive untwisting, but the blood vessels must have been cinched in such a way that he didn't bleed out. The doctors and nurses explained the situation to him and suggested his family come to say goodbye. He looked like he was lounging on the couch watching TV with a blanket over his lower half. Once the realization set in, he replied with, "How will I explain this mess?" I'm not a nurse, but I do know my father's possibly last words. I wasn't there, but he called me and left me a long voicemail. It was the middle of the night, so I was passed out. It all boiled down to him apologizing for a fight we had months before, after which we didn't talk for a while. The final words I have recorded before he hung up were, and I quote, "I hope you don't blame yourself for what is going to happen, but I think this is the end for me. I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you one last time." He committed suicide within an hour of that voicemail according to the coroner's report. I was only 17 at the time. When I woke up the next morning, it was too late to call him back. It may not be haunting to most, but it does haunt me to this day, and I still blame myself because I could tell from his voice that fight was still weighing on him. I apologize in advance if you hear my voice cracking through the rest of the recordings, but this was a rough one to read. The whole thing, not just this one. My grandmother grasped the nurse's hand and said, "I think I'm going to die now." The nurse was telling her no, she was doing much better and would likely leave soon, but my grandmother was gone before she could finish her sentence. She knew. I'm a nursing student in Canada, and on my palliative rotation, I had a patient that was getting medically assisted dying the next day. He was an elderly cancer patient. He told me he was a self-ordained minister, nothing official, but an at-home type preacher, and that I could confess to him anything I wanted. I humored him and whispered to some of my biggest secrets. I figured, who cares, he was going to die tomorrow anyway. He told me it was all right, and I could tell he appreciated that I confided in him. He also told me his email address and said that while he would not be sending emails in return, he would be receiving them. He was a cool guy. Not a nurse, but when my great uncle was on his deathbed, he told the nurse, "Hey, can you do me a favor and go get my car keys? I'm ready to go." The nurse went and got the keys, and he died before she got back with them. I'm scared. Elderly gentleman. Worsening congestive heart failure, incapacitated, and his wife put him on hospice. He was comfort measures only. I was at the nurse's station, and I could hear him starting to gasp for air. I walked into the room, and he was struggling to breathe. I put my stethoscope up to the back, but I already knew what was happening. His lungs were full of fluid. I sat him up in bed, and he stared at me, eyes wide open, head tilted slightly back. Facial expression was full-blown panic. I'm scared. Immediately after he said the words, his oxygen mask started filling up with pink-red frothy foam, running down his face and dripping onto his gown. He was dead within minutes, and all I could do was watch him. I will never forget his face. I sat hospice with my best friend. She had breast cancer and held it off for 8 years. At the very end, I was holding her hand for the last thing she said. I don't want to die. She really didn't. Wish she was still here. I'm an ER doctor. Old lady, big heart attack, refused treatment, so we made her comfortable, giving her morphine and benzos for her shortness of breath. While she was in the process of dying, I was with her and the family providing comfort. Her daughter said to her, "Just let go, Mom." To which old lady opened her eyes one last time, looked at her daughter and said, "What do you think I've been trying to do?" She passed away a short time later. My brother couldn't really talk while he was dying, but the look in his eyes before his death rattle will haunt me forever. Whatever he saw, it awed him like a kid seeing Disneyland for the first time. I've never seen a person's eyes go so wide. My guess is he saw the whole damn universe at once. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yes, it would. It would be very cool indeed.
I worked in a nursing home, and a lot of people who were dying saw their spouses who had passed before them. One lovely old lady said her husband was in the room, and when I told her it was okay to go with him, she said, "Oh my God, no, I hate him. I'm scared of him," and started to cry. All I could do was hold her hand and tell her I would send him away. She passed very shortly after that with a smile on her face. I hope he wasn't there for her. Looked after a guy with end-stage heart failure. He kept having episodes where if he coughed or leaned forward, anything to increase his intrathoracic pressure, he would pass out. He would come back after a few minutes and gradually go from purple back to pink. How long was I out for that time? He was fully mentally fine, sharp, witty, and at peace with what was going to eventually happen to him. Him and me were joking that one of these episodes was going to kill him, as he sipped his tea and we talked rubbish. 5 minutes later it happened again and he didn't come back. He had a DNR order, which was sensible. Very eerie to talk to somebody so vibrant and alert minutes before he died. Such a nice dude. I want to be in that mindset when I go too. From when I worked in private practice, had a patient get diagnosed with moderately aggressive but treatable throat cancer. We tried everything we could think of to get him to consider treatment. He refused any type of treatment, so after about 3 months, his wife and their 2 adult sons basically carry him into the office at 4:50 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. I was the only nurse in the building. I got him into an exam room. Dude was completely gray, gaunt, and you could hear how close to the end he was every time he breathed. It wasn't exactly a death rattle, but you just knew his lungs were full of fluid. His sons sit him in a chair, and he starts to slide out. The room was too small to put him on the floor, and the exam table was too high to lift him up on it. I stood between his legs and held him upright in the chair while I told the sons to go get the doctor, told the wife to call 911. We all knew nothing was going to keep the man alive much longer. He patted the side of my leg. It was the most he could move and whispered, "I should have listened to you all. I don't want to die." He lost consciousness, and all I could do was just keep him from sliding out of the chair until the EMTs got there. After the ambulance got him to the hospital, he lasted about 4 hours. I've watched 3 people die. The first was my father. He died of non-smoker's lung cancer. He hallucinated a Labrador, then a few minutes later, he tried to get out of the bed and said, "Hang on," and he immediately went into cardiac arrest. 6 months later, my son died before my eyes unexpectedly at 20 months old. Not much to say about that, except that he looked confused before he died. 2 years later, I watched my husband's grandmother die from cervical cancer. She kept asking what time it was. This is something I realized my father did when he passed out too. She said she was ready to die but didn't know what to do. We all just sat with her and laughed and told stories. I sat with her for like 2 days straight, and the second I left the room to care for my newborn, my husband called and said she was dying. I think she wanted me to leave because she knew I had seen enough death before she went. She was an amazing woman. Edit. Feel the need to share that on her deathbed, Grandma Kitty still found the energy to sing the ABCs with her brand new granddaughter, literally a gem of a woman. I didn't mean to. We were sending this middle-aged guy home after his ER visit. As soon as we moved him off the bed, he went unresponsive and had no heartbeat. We did a couple rounds of CPR, and he began to come to. He blinked a couple times, and the doctor running the code jokingly said, "Sir, you almost died in us." The man said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," in a sad way. His heart then stopped again, and we couldn't get him back. I'm a hospice chaplain. Many times, people began to talk to dead family members or pets and describe them there, or see heaven opening up, things like it. I've had a good many predict their death. One patient with ALS requested to see me, and our conversation was about how she's ready and wanted me to help her prepare. Though she seemed months from death, she passed that weekend. One story, though, takes the cake. I was working in a hospital at the time. There was a spiritual, non-religious man I had a good connection with. He requested me to his room, so I came over. He motioned me to crouch by his bed and spoke in a whisper. "Do you see my brother in a corner?" I told him I don't, but I believe he is seeing him. He was completely lucid and calm as he explained he has been in the corner and he's been talking with him, hashing things out and coming to forgiveness like they weren't able to before the brother died. He worried the nurses would think he's crazy and try to medicate him. When I assured him I believed him and just wanted to listen to what he had to say, he went on. I see death, too. She was in the parking lot. I could see her from my window. She had my brother with her. Now she's in the room. She's all black, but she ain't ugly. He was totally at peace. Died a few days later when a tumor invaded an artery.
It's difficult sometimes to separate yourself from these stories and not think about the losses that you've experienced in your life. But to the people who work in hospice and palliative care, thank you for what you do. Thank you.
This isn't something my grandma said to me, but something I said to her while she was in hospice just a few hours before she passed. She had reached a point where she couldn't speak anymore, but she could gesture a little bit. I was alone with her in her room, and my aunt and uncles, all of her kids except my dad, were chatting in the hall. I could tell she wanted something. It was important. I just had a feeling she wanted her kids, that this was a last chance kind of thing. I poked my head into the hall and told them Grandma wanted them, and they should all come. I got brushed off, and they wouldn't come the few feet into her room or stop chatting for a few minutes. I went back and told her that everything was okay, and that all of her kids were just in the next room, and that everyone was here, and we loved her. She seemed panicked for a moment, but then calmed down. I think she knew I was telling her it was okay to go, and was accepting it. I lied to her. My dad wasn't there. He had been arrested earlier that day. We kept it from her, and I couldn't tell her that her kids couldn't be bothered to come to her. It haunts me that I had to lie to the grandmother that raised me on her deathbed. I don't think I'll ever fully forgive my aunts and uncles. She hadn't had more than 2 of her kids in the room for 20 years, and they couldn't even let her see it happen. This isn't creepy, but sweet. I used to plan fundraising events and held a candlelight memorial walk around our hospice house campus every year. One year, there was a hospice patient in the house in her final hours on the morning of the event. She told all of her family, "Don't worry, I'm leading the parade today," and she passed later that day. Her family saw us setting up. When we told them what we were doing, they all started to laugh and cry. They brought her photo out with them the night as they led the procession. Heard my patient talking to herself, so I go in and check on her. She said she was talking to her deceased husband and said, "You don't see him? He's sitting in the chair." Sent a chill down my spine, and then she coded a few minutes later. Shit had me spooked as a new nurse. I'm not a nurse, but my spouse's grandfather passed away last autumn. He was a biologist and loved nature. Before he had passed away, he had explained he had seen another dimension and how all life was connected, and told his children that he wished they would meet again as molecules in a flower. I thought these things were beautiful and reflected well on his life as someone who dedicated his time in learning about nature and its wonders. He had the most amazing life, and passing away so peacefully was a well-deserved end for a man as good as he was. ER doc had a patient who had a heart attack at home while cooking dinner. Right before he had a full cardiac arrest in the ER while we were getting him hooked up to monitors and stuff, he goes, "Ah, shit," while of course panting for air and sweating like he was running a marathon. I asked what was wrong, and he goes, "I forgot to turn off the oven before I kicked the bucket." He immediately tried to die. Not a nurse, but I was with 2 family members when they passed. They had sudden moments of clarity that only lasted a few seconds, but was the strangest, most religious, spiritual moments in my life. When my grandpa was dying, he was in full-blown sundowners. He wasn't coherent, couldn't really speak except in the early mornings, and was hallucinating all sorts of things like dead family members and stuff. Most of his communication was just paranoia about the nurses trying to kill him and awful stuff. I was a young teen, so my mom didn't really want me to be around him when he was like this. The last time I saw him, something clicked on in his head. It's like he fought through the cloud of unreality in his head and made direct eye contact with me and grabbed my hand. Determination, that's what's important, is all he said, but it was like he knew it was the last time he would see me. It was like someone said, "All right, you've got 4 words, make them count." Immediately after that, he went back to a semi-vegetative state and mumbling. He died not long after that, and those words have pulled me through some of my toughest days. It was like the last lesson he had for me, and he had to tell me this. It took me a long time to really understand those words, but I faked it until I made it. Thanks, Grandpa. You were the best.